Good stuff. Okay, so the last one of these is narrative sequential immersion. Can be used to describe a player's compulsion to see how a sequence of events continues. Typically, we're talking about narrative stuff here, so what happens next in the story. But this is also just related to any sense of progression, such as exploring new spaces. Like, I'm very interested in walking through these temples or the castle in Ico, for example, or evolving gameplay mechanics. Like, I want to see what the next upgrade does. Is a sequential immersion. You want to see what's possible when I do the next thing. So it's basically a deep and compelling investment in the progression of events, locations, and/or abilities. Focus here will be typically what happens next. And this is obviously a hugely important system. You know, it's a hugely important strategy when you're making a game. You want the player to play more. You want the player to play more, and preferably you want the player to eventually explore everything you made. That's kind of the goal as a developer. It's not like doing a painting where you expect people to be able to stand in front of the painting and see the whole thing, and maybe there's more detail bits you want them to look at carefully, but essentially they've seen the whole thing. With a video game, there's so much to potentially unpack. You want people eventually to see pretty much everything you made for them, because that's why we make stuff. We want people to be entertained and enjoy our creations. So we really need to be able to understand how to use kind of this compelling gameplay to pull people into the systems, to make them want to find out what happens next. Very, very important one. And as a games writer, alongside games designer, as a games writer, I'm very invested in trying to use kind of classic plot structures, character arcs, the performance, the direction of these kind of things to pull people through stories. But it's absolutely valid to kind of go, no, the tech tree is my sequential immersion for this.
Yeah.
Star Control 2, fun stuff.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun because this was we always loved sci-fi, so that was a huge plus. But that was the first time where we would talk about what could happen next in the universe. This was the first time where it felt like the universe was not rotating around the player, but the player was in the universe, and the universe was moving. If the player moved in the right direction or not, doesn't care the universe. The universe was moving. And if you didn't move as a player with the universe, you lost the game. So the first, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 times we played the game, we obviously lost. But we managed to get into the universe. There are so many different paths you can take, where the universe and the races and the places, everything changed with it. There were races killed off by other races, and the player never knew. There was a race in the game we just met after the 3rd or 4th try. I don't know. So this was very, very interesting to know what comes next. Also, you could befriend races and get their spaceships as let's call it secondary ships for battle, and that was always fun too, right? But the really interesting part was the story part, how the story evolved, and it seemed in the first playthrough very linear, but on the second we learned it wasn't at all. It was very open. Of course, it was illusion with a lot of branches in the storyline and movement, but it was very, very, very good.
Yeah, and definitely, and I think things like ideas like branching stories are very powerful if you expect people to replay a lot. I think there was a game called Shadow of Memories, which was a release title for the PlayStation 2, I think. And the controls were absolutely awful. I don't recommend playing it just because the controls are so bad now. But it had branching narrative in it, and it was. I would love dearly if anybody ever knows how to get the game design document for this. I want to know how the hell they did it. It had this kind of multiple time periods, parallel time travel thing. The story was actually set in a German town, and you play this character and you walk into a cafe and you pick up a stone, which is the philosopher's stone, and it can bring life. And everything escalates from that point onwards. And there were, I think, 9 different endings, and I did find them all in the end. But the weird thing was, the first time you played it, it was like an 8-hour sort of, felt like a linear narrative game, and I finished it. I was like, oh, it was an okay ending. The story was all right. I've got no idea what I could have done different, but it told me I got ending F or something like that. So I was like, a few months later, I picked it up again. I thought I'd have another try, and it took about 6 hours the next time, and I got a completely different ending. And as I was playing it the second time, I was like, oh, I could have done that differently. I didn't have to stay in that time period or that point. I could have traveled. Okay. And so I think I played it pretty quickly again the next time. And the next time was like 4 hours, completely different ending. And then I was like, oh my God, I see all these options of things I can do now. Oh my God. And playing it again and again until I got the final ending. And, this game came out a very long time ago, so I'm afraid this is slight spoilers. The final ending is you get the option, which you never had before, to not pick up the jewel in the cafe and just walk away.
Oh, that's cool.
What a secret ending. Oh my God. I just like, as far as, one of the things about branching, when you're trying to create a branching narrative, is you want to give the player the sense that they have power to influence the story.
Yeah.
And when you're writing it as a story for a game, that's one of the biggest decisions you have to make, is like, how much can the player influence the story? And often not very much. And most of the time, it's fine. We don't care that we can't change the story of Uncharted, because the story of Uncharted is so much damn fun. But in a game with branching like that, and to let you not even have the story start, and just to let you walk away from the story completely. Oh my God, what the sense of power that gave me as a player, the sense of like, I am in this world. I had the choice to not even play it. What happens if I walk away from that story? That story ends just there. None of it ever happens at all. What a powerful thing for them to give us. A game called Shadow of Memories on PlayStation 2. Crazy complex design system. I've got no idea how they did it, but it's fascinating in what they created. Really interesting stuff.
It reminds me a little bit of Far Cry 4. I think it was Far Cry 4, where the antagonist set you into a room and said, wait, I have to do this, or stuff like that. So obviously the player should break out of the room and get involved into the story. But if you stay 5 minutes there, the antagonist come back, have a nice meal with you, puts you back into a train or plane, I don't remember, and the game is over. That was also very funny.
I love it when people do this kind of thing. It's great fun.
Yeah.
And Far Cry is one of those weird things that it blends the absolutely absurd with sometimes the quite impactful social commentary.
Yeah.
It's a really odd series in terms of
Yeah.
tone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
good fun stuff. What was your next example? Wing Commander. Oh yes,
Wing
and
Commander,
again, like
yeah.
TIE Fighter as well. In many ways, yeah.
Yeah, right. But I guess TIE Fighter had it too, thinking about it. This has branching missions. So when you lose a mission, it's not game over. When you lose a mission, you get a different second mission to correct your mistakes and take another branch. So this was very, very interesting to see what's next. Also, it's one of the Chris Roberts games, so obviously it had beautiful cutscenes and stuff like that. But you get involved with these cutscenes because they are very interesting. There is stuff happening behind the scenes. It's not just mission 1, mission 2, or mission 1.5 and mission 1.8. It's different. It's not every time different, but it's a little bit different the second time you play it. And I was very involved with it because it's also like Battlestar Galactica, like Star Wars and stuff like that. So yeah, that helped too.
Yeah, I released a game with a company called SassyBot called Fragments of Him, and it came out, I think it was 2016, 2015 now, as it's a very narrative-based game. It's about a young man who dies in a car accident and how his friends and family come to terms with that. So not exactly light-hearted stuff,
Mhm.
but one of the things we did was the game is very linear. There's literally one branch in it, and it comes back again, so you always have the same ending. And it's literally, if you walk to the bathroom in the first scene, you get kind of one branch, and if you walk to the kitchen in another scene, you get another branch, and you don't know you've even made a choice. But if you play the game a second time, you go the other way around, then it's like, oh, it's different. Another thing we did was that each time you played it, I wrote 3 versions of each line in the game. So if you went to the theatre 2 nights in a row to see the same play, you'll get a slightly different performance. The actors might not say exactly the same line. It's probably the same line, but it might be slightly different every time. And I wanted the game to feel a bit like that, like you were sitting down and someone was trying to tell you the same story. They weren't quite hitting the same beats every time you did it. So there's lots of different ways we can use this sense of you're still playing the same thing, but there's a little bit of randomness in there as well, just to make it feel like it's slightly fresh every time you go through it.
Yeah.
Powermonger.
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned Populous, but
Populous.
I was never a fan of Populous. I quite liked Powermonger because obviously all the details there. If there are birds flying from your army, maybe there's a trader in there signaling with some doves or stuff like that where your army is, and these little details. But also I was very invested in the, I don't know, 500 islands you have to conquer or stuff like that. What comes next? What's on the next islands? How is the layout of the next island? What are the villages and stuff like that? I really liked it and got invested into it. Also, it helped this view because I feel like watching through the eyes of the king or stuff like that. So here are the generals in the background, and before us is some kind of all-seeing eye or stuff like that, where I can see my army and give orders to my generals, and these generals are very powerful and very intense, staring at you all the time and stuff like that. So yeah, it was very funny and also a little bit dark, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's again also one of the things that's great about some of these sort of almost systems that get so complex. They feel procedural, they feel random almost, and so then you start to play with the system of like, if I try this, what happens next?
Yeah.
And that key question of what happens next, like I say, for me, I'm quite a narrative focused person, but it does also function in terms of a systems kind of thing. And again, as I said at the very beginning of this whole talk, you know, we've got these kind of 4 different ways of thinking about immersion, but they do overlap and they do work together. And it could be that, you know, you really push up one of them. What does that do to the others? Does it drag the others up? Does it push the others down? And here you've got this sense of what happens next is a deeply compelling thing, but you've also kind of got a connection with a general that you want to succeed, which is perhaps more of a kind of a character like link, an empathic link with that. You've got the systems, which is like, oh yeah, okay, that happens there, which means that's probably going to happen there, which means I do this, which means and then I do that, which has this result for me. And you're learning to understand the system, which is much more of a systems immersion kind of thing. So you get this sense that there is this playfulness within these different systems of engagement. And as a developer, and as a critic as well, as a journalist, or anybody who thinks about games, I think it's useful to be able to have the language to talk about these in different ways. If we'd just been saying this is immersive for the last 4 hours, it's immersive because it's fun to play. It's immersive because it's random. It's immersive because it's got a character. We're not really any better off about how I could then make a game better.
Yeah.
And the next game that I play, I kind of go, well, Powermonger is better for you than Populous because, and you know, you can kind of say, yeah, I think the sequential immersion is more interesting. I think there's this empathic link with these kind of commander characters. There's a sense of purpose for dominating 500 islands, which I might not have felt with Populous, where there was just like a few different strategy things. So you can see why, you can begin to pick apart why Powermonger might be better for you than Populous, why Tomb Raider might be appealing to some people and Uncharted is appealing to others, or why they're not, why they've got the same appeal. And we can really begin to kind of link these things together and actually, I think, begin to form a more intelligent perspective on what games are, why we like playing them, and how we can characterize a good one from a bad one. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about video games is that I think the first paying video game was Pong, and I think that was like 1974 or something like that. And so if you kind of trace from Pong through to say about 2015, that's about the age of Charlie Chaplin in films. From the first cinematic paid-for exhibition of films through to Charlie Chaplin is about the same period from Pong to about 2015. So we are around about the time of Citizen Kane. Talkies have just started, the audio has started becoming a thing. I don't think we're particularly into color cinema yet. That's the level we're at in terms of the history of video games compared to the history of cinema. We're just getting past Charlie Chaplin at the moment. And so the language of how we understand what games are doing and how we talk about them and how we perceive what they do to us and what we do to them and how they are a participant in culture and discourse, it's really evolving in the same way that the early films, nobody thought they were that important to culture, and now we kind of go, of course films contribute to the national discourse. And if America wants to justify war, suddenly there's a load of war films being made, and Top Gun Maverick being sponsored by Lockheed Martin and stuff like this as an advertisement. You can see how the discourses of society are reflected in the media, and we've not completely got to that point with video game discourse yet. I don't think but we see that video games are doing this. Video games are absolutely reflecting the trends in culture. So I think it's important that we develop further the language of how we talk about games, which is why I wrote this thing about immersion in the first place. It's like, I've heard this word so many times, and we're all saying something different with it. And I'm not saying this is a perfect system. There's other people who have different systems, but I think these four, they work pretty well to make the discussion more meaningful. And that's all I was trying to do with this. I'm not telling you it's a perfect system. Please, if you're an academic out there watching this, pick this apart and write something better. Absolutely invite you to it. That's how academia works. We come up with something we think is good and somebody else takes it apart and makes something better from it. Go for it, please. I want you to. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying this is interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Anyway, let's have a look at your next example. Metro Exodus, nice, very nice, yes.
Yeah, because this is not just about exploration, but it's also about the story and the evolving story. And I think for me, it's one of the few games that are still getting to released where I shut off the game and I'm wondering, what comes next? I'm interested in what comes next. Also, it's one of the few games where I don't want it to end it, because I think there's so much story left to tell. So please tell, but it unfortunately ended, and I think that's the important part in this game. I got really invested in it because it's explorative, it's linear, but also there are parts in it that are very non-linear. But the game acts very naturally on that. There is a friend or an NPC which you can find, and that helps you in this way or in another way if you make another quest or sub-quest or something like that first. So there's always a reaction from the game of the choices the player makes, and that feels very naturally and very involved.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great example of it, where you just want to see what happens next in the story of the world and how these stories can continue.
Yeah.
I had also this with Dying Light 2. I loved just going through the campaign and doing all the side missions. And once I've done the campaign and the side missions, I'm completely done. I don't care about upgrading my character anymore. I have had that in other games though, where it's all about the skill tree for me. I love skill tree. I'm a sucker for a skill tree, and I
Okay.
know they're just like the easiest way of pulling people into games. But I find skill trees really compelling. But I also find sometimes I get to the end of a skill tree and I've seen what happened next, and I'm kind of done with the game.
Hmm.
And then I'm just like going through. Then it's just like, oh, I'm just fighting. Just get this fighting out of the way. I just want to see the end of the story now. And as long as I'm progressing, both in terms of like skill and a bit of with the story, then I'm very happy. But if I've maxed out my skills and I've still got like half the story left to go, I'm like, yeah, this combat might not be as good. And if the story is really good, of course I'll finish it. But not all stories and games
Yeah.
are great. Let's face it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think this narrative sequential one is really interesting because it can be about like skill trees and the mechanical advancement, or what's the next temple going to look like in Tomb Raider or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's really compelling.
Yeah.
I didn't find the third Tomb Raider particularly compelling, but I thought of the recent ones. I mean,
Oh, okay.
but I found going and finding all the crypts and the temples and the puzzles really interesting. So it's like, what's the next puzzle going to be like?
Hmm.
Was more compelling for me than the story. I like the story, the Rihanna Pratchett stories in the first two, but the third
Yeah.
one was a different writer.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but in other games, sometimes the story's not great, but the upgrade of the character is really compelling, and I'll just be there to upgrade, and I just have fun upgrading. So,
Yeah.
but it's interesting that to me that kind of feels very similar. That what happens next, what happens when I do this, what's going to be the consequence? I think is a very engaging system we have.
Yeah. I don't know if you played or anybody played this, but you start in a nuclear wasted Russia and you have just a train and your squad of fellow soldiers you played the first two games with. And over the course of the game, you got more NPCs within your train, you got new cards for the train, you got a car and a train, and you can explore with it. So yeah, the upgrades, because I hate skill trees. It for me, skill trees always felt like there are abilities I should have from the start, but they are put behind some kind of artificial paywall, and I don't like that. So here it's very clever made because you find some addition for your armor, you find some addition for your gun, you find new guns, you find new attachments for your gun, and that flows naturally much better than a skill tree, I think, and gets me even more invested into the story. What car might I get next? What maybe I got a new engine for my train, maybe I got new guns for the train or something like that. That got my imagination flown, even if there is no guns for train and stuff like that. But I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think skill trees are interesting because obviously we've had them in the past. They were just less obvious. When you go from like a pistol to a shotgun in Doom,
Yeah,
that's a skill tree upgrade.
yeah,
It's as simple as that. The finding the BFG in Doom, it is or the Quake, I think that one was. That is a skill tree upgrade. It's just it doesn't look like one because we weren't
yeah,
told, hey, that's the last point on the
yeah.
skill
Right.
tree.
Yeah, yeah,
They've always kind of been there. It's just how obviously we do it. And I'm a bit of a tick box gamer. I like completing my lists in games. I do
yeah.
find
Okay.
lists of stuff like oh god, Assassin's Creed games are just my nemesis because there's 200 crates on the map that I
Yeah,
must go and open, and I
yeah.
will do it even though I'm sitting there going, I don't need this money, I don't care, I just want this icon to disappear from my map that's
Okay.
there to be done, so I'll go and fucking do it, and it just drives me insane, but I do it anyway.
Yeah, that's
So
that's that's interesting because sometimes I think it's the Apple thing. When there's something new, there's this little bubble with a number in it or stuff like that, or there's a star on it. And if a game has that, I have to untick this box. It drives me crazy. But finding all crates in Assassin's Creed, I don't even care. So that's interesting because you obviously are a sucker for both, right?
the weird thing is, I actually hate both of those things, but I do still do them anyway. I dislike notifications. I don't like. I like to read a lot of the lore in games, but
Yeah.
sometimes I don't want to read all the lore in games, particularly if I've not found the lore particularly
Yeah.
engaging. Or I'm finding this a little bit with God of War Ragnarok. the law pops up when there's a middle of a conversation going. I'd rather hear the conversation,
Yeah.
but I know I'm not going to go back into the menu to bother reading the law. So I have to kind of pause it to read the law then. Otherwise, I'm never going to go back into the menu and find the law.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of, you've got this kind of thing of like, I'm either going to have a notification sitting around or I'm going to lose it or it breaks. So it's a bit weird. It's a weird tension. And like I say, you know, I'd probably find 30 boxes hidden around the world in Assassin's Creed really fun. 200 I don't find fun,
Mm-hmm.
but I still find it compelling. And
Okay.
this is still that level of just like, I don't want to do this, but I kind of feel like I have to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily the good side of engagement, that one. That's
Yeah.
well, there's also things called dark design patterns, which are designed to take your money or to make you do things you don't want to do. Getting you addicted to games
Mm-hmm.
in an unhealthy way is a dark design pattern, and it's something that ethically and morally most games developers don't really want to do, but some of our bosses want us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you can certainly see this a lot more in free to play games.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I play a lot of games. One of the games I played the most in the last year is a game called Switchcraft. It's a free-to-play match-3 puzzler on Android and iOS and stuff like that. It's got a really nice story. The match-3 mechanics are just perfect. They're lovely. I've paid no money for this game at all, and I think last week I completed level 3000. I have completed this game. And you know, I find it absolutely amazing that they've managed to make a free-to-play game which is that fun, that compelling, that polished, and are giving it away. I don't think they're going to make a Switchcraft 2 because I don't think Switchcraft made much money because they made it a little bit too easy for people to just be able to play it and not give them money for it. I would happily have given them 15, 20 euros for this game. I've had so much fun playing this. It's been really a good experience for me. But a lot of free-to-play stuff, they need your money, otherwise they can't make it games anymore.
Yeah.
And so they are designed in a way specifically to milk money out of people who can afford it, and sometimes people who can't afford it. And as games developers, we are just people. We want people to have a good time. We want to make games. We want to keep on making games. We need to get paid to make games. And we don't want to exploit people. We don't want to be nasty. We want people to pay us a fair amount for the game to the best of their ability and the capability that they have. You know, we've seen like Russian developers during the last sort of 11 months go, pirate our games. You can't send us money for this. We'd rather you just play our games and have fun than support a system which is invading Ukraine, for example. You know, we've seen this kind of thing happen out there. And you know, games developers often are very nice, moral, ethically good people. But we are also doing a job in an industry and we deserve to get paid for it. So these systems of compulsion are there to keep us playing. And I think sometimes they can be really good and really pull us into a game and make us feel like we've had a great immersive experience, a great engaging experience, which we feel when we leave that experience, we feel refreshed and more prepared to deal with the world around us. Because that's what entertainment's about. It's about giving you a good time, making you feel something, making you experience something, making you inspired, maybe letting you see the world in a new way. But you know, we're not rocket scientists. We're not solving the climate crisis. We are not, you know, solving poverty and world hunger. But the scientists who are out there solving the climate crisis, the people who are inventing, you know, wind power and solar power innovations, the people who are out there campaigning to find fairer systems of government, they're tired at the end of the day, and they turn on Netflix and they turn on Switchcraft and God of War because they need to relax too. You know, feeling engaged, feeling relaxed, feeling part of society, having a good time is an essential function of being a human being. And being able to create an immersive game, a game that engages you through its systems, through the spaces you go through feeling connected with other players or just the characters in the world, and feeling like you have progressed in a meaningful way and had a good time, being excited to play again. That's a contribution to society in the way that theatre contributes to society, that film and music contributes to society.
Absolutely.
It makes us good, better people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
That's me
I
and my
think
soapbox.
that was that was also my last game. And before we are finished, I want to look at the chat. Okay, Rimworld, Icewind Dale, Fallout. Yeah, Fallout.
Good one. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah,
So many different things working there.
yeah. Planescape Torment. I never played, but right, they're obviously very strange, no?
Actually, in terms of spatial immersion, it's something I've not mentioned today, but Planescape Torment is really good for the audio. And
Okay.
audio is incredibly powerful for spatial immersion, for a sense of being in a location. Audio signals are actually processed faster by the brain than visual signals. We understand the world through sound before we even begin to understand it through sight. You can blink, but you can't blink your ears as well, which is another thing. And Planescape Torment was a game that really put detail into the world. Like when at night time, when the kind of the heaters are turned off and the things, you can hear the rats running around in the pipes and things like that. It's really